Espera. Welcome this evening, this afternoon. We have a fantastic panel. We have Rosen Plevneliev, who former Bulgarian president. We have Maria Gavouneli, the president of ELIAMEP. We have Nico Lange from the Munich Security Conference. And we have Daalder from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs to talk about developing democracy, recognizing problems, harnessing opportunities. So we're going to divide this into two. We're going to look first at the threats to democracy, and the focus of this is going to be on democracy in the West over a 10-year time frame. So we're not talking the long-term future. We're not talking about what's happening in the global South. And so I'm going to be very disciplined with my panel. And they're going to have maximum of 3 minutes for each question. So I'm going to start with Maria, because I want to give Maria the first. So the question for the panel is, as you look to the next 10 years in the West, give me one thing that you think is the biggest threat to democracy and why.
Populism.
Populism, okay.
Populism for a very simple reason and a very complicated reason at the same time. Populism tries to make everything look simple. We are living in a very complicated world. We have very difficult issues to address. We have war and peace. We have the transformation of Europe. We have the transition in terms of climate. We have everything that needs to be done, and the doing is difficult. So what do? We reduce that to something that is very, very simply managed. We try to tell people that it's black and white. So you go ahead and you vote for me, and I have the instant solution. There it is, the hair out of the hat, and that's it. And I think that is a problem for itself, because obviously that would lead to disillusionment. That would actually mean that people who have voted for you might not vote again, who have just been hearing about the electorate turning old and moving away. We have people who feel disenfranchised, who feel alienated by the political discussion. That destabilizes societies, and eventually that destabilizes states.
Okay, thank you, Maria. I'm going to ask Nico now to come in. And what do you think is, and I'm afraid you have to choose something that the others have not mentioned.
But I'm the second speaker, so that's still fairly easy.
That's still fairly easy, so.
But first of all, I think we have to be aware, especially the discussions we are having this year, that democracy itself is not the threat. It's a year where we have many, many very important elections, but you meet people everywhere, including at conferences like this, who somehow seem to be afraid of elections, or something bad is happening with elections. I think that is not the threat we are facing. And if populism has already been mentioned, I will just take something that is very complementary. I think for the next 10 years, what we need is much stronger democratic leadership. Our best hope at the moment is an 82-year-old President of the United States. That's the best hope Europeans have at the moment. It says something about a lack of leadership, about a certain de-intellectualization of those who are politically responsible, who very much are interested in polls, very much are interested in small incremental steps, but are not so good in formulating bigger ideas and implement them and lead and work for them to be reality.
Okay, so we have, those were the top two on my list, actually, was populism and lack of leadership. Now I'm going to come to Ivo. What is your one biggest threat that hasn't already been mentioned to democracy?
I think the biggest problem is our guardrails are failing. What do I mean by that? Our systems of democracy are built on rules and norms, some systems, none of which are accepted anymore, in part because of the reasons of populism, but in part because once rules and norms get broken, breaking them again another time and another time becomes very easy. And our democracies are actually strong only when there is consensus on the essential rules and norms. So one piece of consensus that we have all taken for granted in our democracy is that when you lose an election, you leave. And you don't say, I didn't lose the election, I won. Mm-hmm. Well, for the last 3.5 years in the United States, we have a man walking around. You'll recognize him, he's got this orange hair.
Mm-hmm. It's gold, it's not orange.
It's definitely orange. Saying that he won the election and turned an entire political party into his machine for that end. Democracies are not built for those kinds of norm breakers, trust rule breakers. And the system that we have created that may have existed and be effective in other eras are no longer effective in preventing that. Malfeasance is not part of democratic rule. The exception of a fundamental set of values and set of norms is at the core of democratic rule. And when you are willing and able to violate those with impunity, you win. And that's what's happening in Hungary, and it's what's happened in Poland until the people actually rose up. It's what's happening in Turkey. It's what's happening in the United States. Populism may be driving that. They're an easy means towards rule breaking, but it is the inability of rules to be self-enforcing and structures and institutions to be there to do that for you that ultimately breaks down democracy.
Thank you. And so we've got 3 good ones so far. Rosen, what are you going to pull out of your hat, Mr. President?
Let me surprise you. Half of my lifetime I was living in communism, and half of my lifetime in democracy. I know what is to live in totalitarian regime.
Yeah.
That's why I always express myself as a passionate Democrat. But I know that democracy is like this. It's like a rare flower. You need to water it. You need to take care of it every day. You don't do it, it's not going to flourish, not going to blossom. So to make a very simple point, I saw democracy. You want to talk about the same guy who replaced twice the chief prosecutor of the United States, who was not paying taxes, who didn't believe in free media at all, just changed them into those who are enemies and those. And democracy, as we all know very well, is based on rules and institutions that are capable of applying those rules to everybody in the country. Democracy cannot be exported, as we learned from the Arab Spring. Democracy, when it's attacked from outside, it gets stronger. Even in my country, even in Germany, Russia just stopped gas supplies within the night. What do? The plan of the Russians was very simple. You stay in cold, people get on the street, they ruin the country. It was the opposite. Bulgaria got stronger. Democracy gets stronger when it's attacked from outside. The very big problem for democracy, I believe, is it could be eroded from within. The populist, it's a strong man who believe they can solve people's problems. It's uneducated people, voters, who believe that here is a strong man, he's promising to me something. One again and again and again, we don't vote and support people who build up institutions and rules of democracy, but we support people that are populistic and strong. Here's my answer. I'm very much afraid that democracy in a decline, it's not just countries like Hungary, but it's the United States, where we see less efficient institutions, more divisions, less working in a way, a divided society. And that is because of 2 major reasons I'll put on the table, on top of everything that's said. The one is, I wish that we, in the European Union and beyond, will not get into a moral crisis of forgetting our values, who we are, what do we stand for. Because the moral is really important. That comes to the leadership. We need leaders that represent a moral compass to the nation. You want to talk about Trump? Let me tell you about a great German President Gauck and President Biden. You know what President Gauck told me one day? He spent 3 days in Bulgaria. He said, I don't want to have a new mandate. And I said, why? He brought the heavy weight of German presidency, beloved, a priest, high rating, wonderful guy. You know what? Because I am a moral compass of my nation, because I work for the strength of our institution, I don't want, just a second.
No, and
I don't want, yes, I don't want to fall on the stairs. No. I don't want to forget my thoughts. I don't want to fall on the stage, because my nation will not see him as a leader anymore. So he refused to have a second mandate because he worked as a moral compass to the nation.
So
complacency and morals, very important.
Very good. So moral compass. Now, it is interesting, just a note, nobody has, and the President in particular has actually not talked about, he's actually identified the internal threat rather than the external threat. It's interesting our panel hasn't talked about the external threat. Obviously, if you're sitting in Ukraine, you probably think the external threat is what's going to damage your democracy, perhaps more than the internal one. It's interesting that we haven't talked about other sort of extraneous events, but maybe this is partly what Maria was talking about in terms of the difficulty dealing with complex problems, and the world and countries are going to face lots of complex problems. Climate change, migration, demography, just AI, just to mention four. But we're going to stick with the ones, actually I want to add one myself. So, and maybe this is a bit linked to what are the roots of populism, and it's fashionable to say that we have populism because people are unhappy because of the economy, and clearly economic factors are part of it. But I also think that there is an element that's almost a spiritual dimension, is that the people have lost their compass. And it's in that void that not just the populists, but the nationalistic populists, I would say, have come in, because they've got a very easy answer, which is nationalism. Make America great again. Make France great again. Brexit, whatever it is. Does the panel think that as we look at the ultimate sources of these problems, what's behind the problems of the lack of, let's say, the lack of leadership? What is actually driving that, Nico?
Well, I'm not able to look into the heads of German or French or other political leaders. It seems to me that democratic policymaking has become very risk-averse, very tactical, very driven towards polls, and very much afraid of everything.
Yeah.
And it seems to be that this modus of conducting democratic policymaking is not helping in solving the actual problems. And just a parenthesis on populism, as much as I like to think about populism as a threat to democracy, I do not believe that fighting populism is actually a political program. It seems to me to be like a replacement of a political program. I'm not solving any of the real problems the citizens have if I'm saying I'm fighting populism. Maybe I feel good about myself because the populists, of course, are all the time just the others. But the problem-solving capability, that seems to me, needs more leadership intellectually, more creativity in finding solutions to the problems that are there. And then leadership, of course, is needed for coalition building, which is the essence of a democratic policy making, finding majorities, but increasingly also finding groups of countries that are able to solve problems together. And that is the element, I think, where we're talking about Europe on this panel. And you mentioned...
and America.
And you mentioned Russia's war against Ukraine and the Ukrainian defense. I mean, look where we are now. Kharkiv is bombed every day, and everybody is looking at each other. Oh, it would be good if somebody is doing anything. That seems to me is the problem of democratic leadership.
So the question is, though, what are we going to... Let's talk about these four different issues one by one. And does anyone on the panel have a good, we're going to continue with leadership now, but does anyone on the panel have any good suggestions about how we can get better leadership? And perhaps, or if lacking that, perhaps an analysis of why we have bad leadership, or maybe people don't think we have bad leadership. Maybe someone on the panel thinks we've actually got splendid leadership. But does anyone have anything they wish to add to this leadership question? Yes, I've got
ladies first.
Okay, Maria first, and then Rosen.
Thank you. Well, let me go back to my populist theme, which is not a political campaign, or it's not a political program, it's a tool. And it is actually a tool that could be exploited from the outside, so that's your external element answer. But it is also something that would subvert the internal process. If you have to deal with somebody who ends up saying it's black and white so easy, there's no problem, and you have this kind of vicious political fight which becomes a vicious personal fight, after a while those who would like to contribute, who would like to get into a leadership discussion, and they are willing and capable to do something else as well, they would simply move on.
So there's not a good supply of potential leaders because the good people are driven out. The bad drives out the good.
Exactly, inevitable. An example, people of my generation in this country, when we started our careers, we were all sort of looking for jobs all over the place. I'm a lawyer, so you know the law school produces politicians and judges and lawyers and whomever. But all of us decided to become something else rather than politicians. And we left the country to those who were not good enough to become something else. Need you check what happened to this country? So there you are, immediately. Now, the answer is, of course, a long-term answer, because you need to just repopulate the political environment.
So do you have an idea about how to do that?
The idea is actually to just bring people in, try and turn the tables on that populist narrative, the idea being that you need to use information, you need to employ information, you need to use information as a tool itself, and just try and talk to people, educate people, influence people, explain to people that these are shades of gray, this is not black and white. If they are shades of gray, then people would be willing to say, I am capable of doing this, but I cannot deliver on that. It takes time, I grant you that, it's not an easy answer, but again, my argument is that we need to move away from easy answers and black and white situations.
Okay. Rosen, what can we do about leadership?
Speaking about leadership, you know, I travel all over my country in the region, preach and pray democracy, and I try to explain to people, strong men, but they're the strong institutions. There are people, there are always good people that can run the countries. The problem is, and it's a very magic word, it's called mandate. You have a mandate, that's democratic. Within that mandate, do the best for your country, and then give the way to the others. And the solution is, and always has been, for responsible societies, including business elites, social elites, political elites, to be able to project new people, because there is a lot of inflation in politics. People don't want to see one and the same face, 10 years telling them what's right, what's wrong. There have to be new people. There are new people coming in. But political elites, business elites need to take care that changing the people in the leadership, you keep the direction going.
Okay. So this is, I see, Ivo.
So I don't think the issue is per se that the society doesn't have enough leaders who can be in politics. I think that our political systems, by and large, are increasingly geared not to leading but to winning. And the goal of being in politics is to win elections and to get into government. It used to be that you want to win election and get into government to get something done. Right now, the goal is to get in government and win and stay in government. Take the German coalition, brought together three parties that fundamentally disagree on just about everything, except that they all three wanted to win. And so you have a coalition that, on one issue after the other, finds itself constantly trying to figure out how to square in this case, a triangle rather than a circle, in order to move forward on policy. In the United States, we have an entire political party that is dedicated, if it can't win, to make sure the other side loses. I mean, we have, just to take one example of how democracy doesn't work, we have in the United States an overwhelming majority in the House of Representatives to vote $90 billion of supplemental aid to fund the war, or help fund the war in Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. And we're not going to get a vote, because the system would mean that if there is a vote, quote, I would lose. Never mind that Ukrainians would win, that's fine, but that's no longer the case. So we have lost, in some ways, the ethos of why you have democracy, elections,
so do you
in order to get stuff done.
Do you have a solution? Do you have a proposal how we can get away from people thinking they just want to win to thinking, what are they actually going to do that's actually going to be valuable?
You actually have to think about how do you change the system by which people win. It's incredibly expensive in the United States to be a senator, a congressman, let alone a president. Most representatives in the House of Representatives, who serve for 2 years, spend about 90% of their time not legislating, but raising money so they can win again. If you have a system like that, you're not going to have people who are focused on, dedicated to, getting stuff done. So this is a US system. If you have a system, take the Netherlands, where there is no penalty to having a new party, other than that you need, 0.6% of a vote in order to get a single seat. You're going to have 18 political parties competing for 150 seats. That's not about winning. That's not about leading. That's about satisfying your own personal, maybe group identity to find a way to have a seat in the parliament. So there are systemic rules that were built for one set of norms and one set of institutions that frankly really don't work anymore in today's society and need to be rethought. The problem is that you need consensus in order to change rules that benefit, even if it's only a minority, and that makes it difficult.
So this is a problem. It's a sort of chicken and egg problem. And I mean, I wonder if there are ways of changing the system from the outside rather than from the inside. I wonder if, for example, if we need better leaders, maybe some philanthropists can set up schools for leadership. Whether there is anything that could be done, we certainly need a better job done by the media. Maybe we've already got things like the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford, which I used to be one of the trustees for, but we're not spreading around. We need journalists that actually are focusing not just on, oh, where's the election going, who's going to win and who's not going to win. That's a sign from the Pythia, I think.
What did you say?
And so I think that, okay, so now I'm going to bring us back to populism, and I'm going to talk about it as populism nationalism. What can be done to counteract that trend? And Nico, perhaps I can bring you as the first person to answer that question, and then we will take other people in order. Is there anything that you can see practically that can be done?
But it's connected to what we discussed before.
Of course it is. These all things are connected.
In the German political discussion for many years, there has been, I think, a very valuable formulation saying that democracy is dependent on conditions that it cannot create itself. And I think this is a hint towards the cultural factor that I also try to allude to, about intellectual leadership, about having ideas of how to solve problems that are important for our societies, and there is clearly a lack of that, and that could help also to be more competitive towards national populists, or very often they are socialist and nationalist ideas at the same time, and that seems to be on an intuitive level very attractive to many people, providing ideas for solutions that are more competitive than the idea to just carry on with whatever we are doing in very small steps. That seems to be one recipe against populism. And then
intellectual leadership.
Intellectual leadership directed towards the problems that are the real problems and to provide real solutions. And you can ask yourselves, I think very legitimately, without being a populist, are for example, the issues the German government has on its agenda, or the issues other governments have on their agenda, are they really the problems that are needed to be solved right now? Or is it driven by other reasons than the problem-solving demand? And I think people have a very good feeling in democracies, even if sometimes they have difficulties in addressing it into the political arena, if their fundamental problems are addressed and being solved or not. And one driver for national populism or social national populism clearly has been in my country, in Germany, and in other countries in the European Union, that people had the feeling migration is not tackled the way that their solutions are found. The economic development and the costs of living are not tackled in a way that really provides solutions to them. And when they try to address it, they are either addressed from the perspective of a teacher telling them, oh, you have to learn more about this so you will understand how good our policy making is. I understand why people hate that. Many of them hated school right away. They do not want to be taught things. They want to be taken seriously. And also, I think, if we want to really be successful in competing with those social nationalist ideas, we have to take seriously that if people express themselves in the political arena, they might really want a different policy. It's not that they just need re-education. They might want something different than we are doing right now. And democracy also means to take that seriously and to find ways to incorporate this into policymaking. There seem to be the difficulties. And the last sentence, what we can learn, I think, I mean, we are not new to this. There has been populism for a long period of time. I think what doesn't work, and we know it doesn't work, is alienating voters. This has been done over and over. It did not really contribute to less populism. It contributed to, I think, entrenching populism and people trying to send a message or take a stance. I think we have to learn from that as well. But the key still is having an idea of how to solve problems that are really relevant and then move forward with that idea and not just look into the polls.
So that's quite interesting. You're sort of saying we don't want to have an attitude of educating the people. And I don't know where Maria was on that, but I was certainly coming from the perspective of educating the leaders. It's, of course, true that populism has been with us forever. When Plato and Aristotle were discussing democracy, they were always worried that it would degenerate into demagogy, demagogia, which is the Greek for populism. Eva, what can we do what can we in practice do about populism?
So I'm not sure that populism is driven by the ignorant. I think populism is driven, most of the people who support populists are not necessarily ignorant or don't know what they're talking about, which also makes me hesitate that this is an education problem per se, although having better education would be a good thing for all of us, starting with the people who think they already know everything, including me. So I think the larger issue is an understanding of what's being challenged. And what's being challenged is the legitimacy of a way of something that, in fact, even the populists uphold as real: democracy. The institutions that make democracy real, that translate the people's voice into and will into policy. Those are the ones that are being attacked. And in too many of the countries where populism is working, too few of those who care about the institutions are willing to defend it, because the immediate gratification of being with the populist, with the winner, may be bigger, or translated in a different way, the fear of losing may be larger than your willingness to defend the system. I mean, we see this in the United States probably more than I can think of almost every other country, where the entire Republican Party hates Donald Trump, literally does. Every single leader in the Republican Party really despises Donald Trump. and they're all endorsing him for president, and they're doing everything possible to make it possible for him to win. Not because they care about the institutions, but because they kind of fear the consequences to them and to their party of the other side winning.
And so, what is your?
And so,
what is your? Do you have any
practical solution?
Yes.
You know,
because we can sit here always, and it's always very good, as I think we said.
I mean,
at the beginning,
in some
easy
ways,
to hand wring about the state of the world. I mean, I'm coming to you in a moment.
The practical solution has to be to actually say what needs to be said, and to support those who are saying what they need to be said. There are people in the United States who are very clear about what's happening.
Right.
Liz Cheney, who left the Republican Party because of this, a whole slew of Republicans. But it takes leadership. I'll give you another example. I don't know of a single person who served in Donald Trump's cabinet, with the possible exception of Mike Pompeo, who would ever think about serving in Trump's cabinet again. I haven't heard them say that. I haven't heard explain to the American people why, when you or Jim Mattis or John Kelly,
we need some courage.
We need old-fashioned guts.
Old-fashioned guts. Very good. I'm going to bring in Rosen and then Maria.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there are always
Populism. What are we going to do?
Yeah,
what are we
going
to? What are the solutions?
And let me point to two of them. One of them is building up our own democracies. And there was a great Bulgarian president, the founder of our democracy, President Zhelev. He would say, democracy is not perfect, but the only way to heal democracy is with more democracy. How can we have more democracies in our own countries? For example, we can learn from the Germans because they do have democracy on more levels. I admire in Germany, in Switzerland, how they have different coalitions always coming together, national level, provincial level. That's great. In my country, we don't have it. It's not good. We're super centralized. I'm working on a reform to have more levels of democracy. Second, we can learn, for example, from Europe, talking about our American friends. I would hope, I would preach and pray, and I would predict, as a result of these awful elections we're facing in the United States, finally, I would hope to see Europeization of American politics. Why just two political parties, for God's sake? Why two? Who has the courage to make another one? In my country, you know how many political parties we have? 300.
Well, that may be taking it a bit too far.
Let's not better not going to do
300 parties, 30 different levels of democracy.
You know how much in
we'll
Parliament?
Be having elections.
37, built in different blocks. The other solution is really just a final sentence. We can fight also populists by showing the results. I say very clearly, there is no populist who run any nation and any country in the world that solved any problem of any country in a sustainable way.
This is very important. If you deliver, this is a very, very important antidote. Maria.
Well, let me continue from that, because I would start from that. And that really creates expectations, and that really creates alienation, because, of course, the expectations are not met. And then you move on to more extreme populism, and you end up with being more and more polarized and all that. How we deal with that, let's break that down and see whether we can reconstruct that. You suggested perhaps that we can educate leadership. Well, if only we could. Because it would have been so wonderful to just have, I'm a teacher at hand, so, at heart. So I can,
let's
raise
a few $100 million and set up some schools
whatsoever.
for teachers.
Well, we need to create the prerequisites for building leadership. That I grant you. That means that you need to have the necessary information. That means that you have to know what it is that you're talking about. You have to be realistic. You have to know what you know and what you don't know. Things like that, yes, you can teach. But at the end of the day, you cannot teach courage. Spine, I call it. You call it guts. But at the end of the day, it's something...
They're connected.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, you need to stand up and be counted. And that's what we do in democracies. We stand up and be counted. And we do that every time we have elections. We stand up and be counted. That's what we do. Democracy is very difficult to handle, and there's no question about that. extremely difficult to handle. You need to talk to people, you need to convince people, you have to agree to disagree, you have to come up with common ground, you have to find ways not to fight, although you might hate the other guy for all I care. But at the end of the day, that's it, compromise, and compromise is very difficult.
Okay, so then I want to come back to the issue, which is really what both Rosen and Ivo brought up in different ways, but they're linked, moral compass and rule breaking. What can we do to stop rules being broken? Now, I mean, the good news is that after the last presidential election, the vice president didn't do what he was told to do by the president, and we actually did have a change of power. The good news is in the UK, when Boris Johnson tried to suspend Parliament and actually got the late Queen to agree to suspend Parliament, that the Supreme Court kicked in and stopped it. So there are, and the good news is that Poland, it went through that difficult period and there was a change of government. So should we really be so pessimistic? But what are there actually? What are the things that, again, practically we can do to prevent this rule breaking?
So I mean, Hugh, you're right that,
and not just to prevent it, but to prevent it going off track.
You're right that the institutions sometimes hold.
Yep.
And I think you've made 2 examples, and I think the British Supreme Court example, 3. They're all
the Polish
excellent.
foreign minister has just arrived on cue.
Well, but there the people did the job, so that helped, which is why he's now Polish foreign minister as opposed to something else, and deservedly so. But the problem is when the system, here's what I'm worried about, is when the rules are broken and they are not enforced.
Yep.
What happens then? So we are very close to this in the United States. Yes, the rules are they were broken and they're being upheld. The president, former president of the United States, is facing a serious legal action against him. But that legal action, because of a whole variety of things that have to do with playing with rules on the margin, may not happen before the next election.
So what can be done? What extra can be done?
Well, if the system is not willing, here's the problem. If the system that is based on norms and rules and that are self-enforcing doesn't work, the system collapses.
Well, you can have people, you could potentially have people power in some form or fashion.
People power is not within the rules of the system either. It overthrows the system. Now, sometimes revolution is a good thing.
No, but you can also have counter-coups. You can have the people can rise up.
Like I said, if a counter coup is the basis for your democratic system, you've got a problem.
Well, indeed, we've got a problem, but we've got the problem. We know we've got the problem. Anyway, I want to see, Maria, what do you think is that can be done to enhance our Western democracy's capacity to bring things back into line if people try to break the rules?
Institutions are populated by people. The institutions work because there are people who work the institutions. What happens with this pervasive idea of populism is that we have got accustomed to rule breaking. Once upon a time, if you had one idea, even the threat of a criminal process like the ones that your candidate in the US is currently facing, that particular individual would have disappeared from the face of the earth and certainly from the political scene. That is not the case here. Why it's not the case here? Because people see that there are no repercussions and therefore, they become tolerant. Why are there no repercussions? Because nobody had the guts, nobody had the spine to stand up and say no more. And there were a few people who stood up, and that's why we have a change in power. Well, you need the people. And the people are actually the citizens. We don't expect somebody to come from outer space to help us out. We help ourselves. This is democracy. That's exactly the essence of this very difficult game.
Yes. So, Nico, I'm going to come to you. What is your proposal to enhance following the rules and to discipline the rule breakers and to make sure that if things get offline, they come back into track rather than spiral out of control?
But first, I believe with European democracies in the last years and decades, we have some experience. And I think the European institutions have not been good enough when populists did what they have a tendency for once they are in government, overreaching out of the executive branch into the other branches to push back against this. And the European Union, I think, would have had more instruments to push back against it and not allow the checks and balances to be damaged or even destroyed. But for individual reasons, in each and every case, the European Union did not enforce it. And I don't know if the minister agrees or not, but it would be easier for the new Polish government if it would not have to use a lot of resources to push back against all the violations that have been implemented by the government before and focus on policy making right away. And there is a responsibility of the European Union in that. But of course, you mentioned the external factors, and I think the danger of this changing the checks and balances and the overreach of the executive branch is that this connects with external influence and with pushes from outside for those who are using the openness of democracies to work against democracy itself. And then we, I think, clearly have to understand that fighting corruption, having a better control of money flows are instruments to protect democracies, and that is something that somehow is, I mean, I'm coming from the country that still believes that cash is the greatest thing at all, so
I'm going to stop you there.
I'm talking to myself here, but those are elements in protecting democracy, and you want to stop me, but one last point.
I want to give the last word to the President, but can I just...
We cannot, the way how social media are amplifying discourses and are dividing discourses into our democracy, we cannot have this kind of
Okay, we're not going to answer the problem of social media in 10 seconds. Rosen, what do you think we can do in practice?
We need to fight for people's minds and hearts. If we cannot unite the pro-Russian parts of society, pro-populist part of society, we should unite the pro-European. Yep. We should unite the pro-democratic. We should work for people's minds and hearts. Let me give you just a very simple examples and show with arguments what the populists do. One day I spent a whole day with Orban, and I asked him, tell me, what is your recipe for success? And he says, you know, every day I wake up with the idea how to project myself in front of my nation as opponent to the system. That's what all populists do. But actually, I'm the system. So let us show to everybody, to ordinary people, what is the system of populists, what are the results they do when they run a country. And again, you know, just unite to increase the strength of our democracy.
I agree with that. Unite. I mean, and there was a wonderful man called Gene Sharp, who was an American academic, but he also wrote hugely about nonviolent struggle, and his most famous book was called From Dictatorship to Democracy. But he also had a book which was on the opposite direction, and it was called The Anti-Coup, what one needs to do, how society needs to organize if a country is descending into dictatorship. On that note, thank you very much. Wonderful panel.